Hello and welcome everyone in another episode of Researcher Celebrity. Today we have Dr. Muki Shey with us. A brief introduction of Dr. Muki. He has done his bachelor's in biochemistry from University of Yaoundé, Cameroon, and then another bachelor's of science in medicine honors in infectious disease and immunology. For PhD, he attended University of Cape Town, South Africa, and specialization in clinical sciences and immunology. He did his postdoc at University of KwaZulu-Natal and then also worked as scientist 2 and laboratory manager at Area's Global Tuberculosis Vaccine Foundation, Cape Town. He joined University of Cape Town in a capacity of medical research scientist and currently is chief research scientist in the Department of Medicine, University of Cape Town. With this brief introduction, we'll say thank you so much, Dr. Shea, for taking time out for this conversation.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
We always start our conversations that how and when you decided that you want to become a researcher.
Yeah, so it's been a long and convoluted journey for me. But when I completed my high school back in Yaoundé, back in Cameroon, so in high school, completing high school, I was torn between being a medical doctor in a medical scientist, as well as being an engineer, because I was always fascinated by aeroplanes and by rocket and aviation. So I wanted to become an engineer as well and become a rocket scientist, like a real rocket scientist. So when I completed my high school, so I sort of went to the university because after how the system works after your results, as when now you have your high school result, as when now you can go register at the university. So I went and actually registered to do physics because at that time now I leaned to the part of engineering. So I registered to do physics in the University of Yaoundé 1. So when I came home that day, so my elder brother, who was already a medical doctor and working, convinced me that no, it was better for me to be in medicine than to be an engineer. So he convinced me, and then the next day I went back to the university and then I deregistered from physics, and then I registered in biochemistry. I registered in biochemistry, and then I completed my undergraduate in biochemistry. Yeah, so when I finished my undergraduate in biochemistry, so I really then wanted to do something in infectious disease and medical research, and we didn't have any infrastructures then that could allow me to do what I wanted to do. So I started to look out of Cameroon. So I looked at in the UK. So I got admitted in a few universities, but it was so expensive, so expensive to study there because I didn't have a full scholarship. They offered me a partial scholarship, but I couldn't afford the balance. So again, my brother came into the picture before 6 months before I completed my first degree. He had moved to South Africa. So he was working at the University of Cape Town already, also as a medical doctor and clinical researcher. And then that's when he convinced me to say, oh, okay, University of Cape Town is actually well equipped with great infrastructure to do medical research and yeah, and will be a good place and it's much cheaper than in the UK. So that's how I ended up at the University of Cape Town and then did my postgraduate in infectious disease. And yeah, just continued from there and I never looked back. Yeah.
Absolutely. So when you moved to your University of Cape Town for your master's program, then you what convinced you to just switch from master's program to PhD so soon?
Okay, yeah. So actually, when I left from Cameroon, I did the Bachelor of Science in Medicine honors that I did. I actually did it at the University of Cape Town. So then when I applied now to get into that program, so then I was admitted, yeah, to come and do the program in honors degree in infectious disease and immunology. So then I came and then I completed that program, which is a 1 year program. And then after that, then I started with my master's program, which was still in infectious disease. So as I started, because there was the project that I was working on, so was around on TB vaccine. So it was quite a big project, a broad project. at the time. So when I started working on it, so my supervisor, I had a discussion with my supervisor because it was an option, right? That you could either finish your master's and then start your PhD afresh, or you have an option to upgrade from a master's to a PhD. So when I started with my master's, and then we looked at the project, and then we saw that was quite broad, big for just a master's degree. And then that's how now we made a decision for me to upgrade from a master's into a PhD, so that I could then continue with the project now, just continue with it, and then just obtain a PhD on the project rather than a master's. Yeah.
So the amount of research exposure you got during your masters was to you to convince to PhD. And then let's start with the start of PhD, that your expectations when you thought you are transitioning from masters to PhD. Essentially the project is the same, most of the thing will remain the same, but the transition to PhD, how was that, and then how the journey went?
Yeah, so it was interesting. So when I actually started, because anyway, like I said, the project was broad and it had different components to it. So the component for my master's that I had to do involved doing like immunogenetics, where you had to look at how genetics affects the immune responses, for example. So, and some of the assays, laboratory assays that I needed to perform at the time, so we are not yet established at the University of Cape Town or in our faculty. So then I had the opportunity to travel to the US, the University of Washington in Seattle, where I learned some techniques from there. I learned some techniques, and I was spent about 6 months there in the University of Washington. Then I came back to UCT, where I then implemented some of those assets that allowed me to complete that section of the project. And then the further section that I then needed to do now, for which I continue for the PhD, and had to do with other techniques, other assays such as the flow cytometry and a lot of other multiplex assays. So when I actually then started, I had to do when you work in a laboratory, you need to do a lot of optimization to make sure that the assets that you are using to generate the results, the assets are reliable and the results that you get are reproducible and accurate. So when I started with my PhD, so it was a challenge because when I started now, we set our time, like, okay, I was going to take about maybe 6 months to optimize these assays and get them running to process the clinical samples that we needed to process. By the time that the optimization had ended, it was 18 months down the line. So yeah, so the first challenge was that yeah, it took longer than expected, to
That
get
sounds like a
systems
perfect.
working.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That sounds like a perfect start to a PhD. You expect that something you will achieve the first goal in 6 months or a year, and then it turns it out in 2 years or so.
Yeah,
So
that was a direct experience. Yeah, so it took 18 months to get something that I initially planned for 6 months to get it going.
mhm,
So yeah.
that's how the PhDs turn out from 2 3 years to 5 6 years. That is most of the reason in there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
But I think the one point which you actually brought up very is or very crucial, especially in the university where you do not have infrastructure or the required instrumentation. So having established those collaborations, that as you worked in University of Washington for 6 months or so. So for all the viewers, I'll say that whenever you are doing or signing up for a PhD in any institute anywhere in the world, always see what they have, what are the skill sets you want to learn from that group, and then the possible collaborations all around the world where you can have this experience of working in different countries, if possible, or in different labs, if the collaborations are mostly the national level. So having this in your CV as a PhD student also shows your capacity that you can work in different groups at the same time. You can establish collaborations or maintain the ongoing collaborations with the lab, because these are all the skill sets when at the after completion of your PhD whenever you're applying for the postdocs, these are the things which the PIs actually look very deeply. And switching from PhD to postdoc, Dr. Shea, when you were about to complete your PhD, because obviously we started that you thought something will take 6 months, it took 18 months. But now you already know that you have a date when you are going to defend or you submitted your thesis. At that time, what were the thoughts going on in your mind regarding the research and future career?
Yes, so at the time of completing my PhD, so I sort of made up my mind. So I knew that I needed to do a postdoc. Yeah, I needed to do a postdoc, but I also at the same time I made up my mind that I also needed to have industry experience outside academia. So as I was completing my PhD, so because my field and my interest has been infectious disease and immunology, so infectious disease encompassing like tuberculosis, HIV, and other pathogens. So I'd spent over 1 year of my honors degree and about 5 years of my master's PhD combined in mainly working on tuberculosis and TB vaccine. So I wanted to broaden my mind into other infectious disease. So I then decided I was going to do my postdoc in HIV immunology, HIV prevention, HIV immunology. So that's how then I transitioned from TB at the University of Cape Town. And then I went to do my postdoc at the University of KwaZulu-Natal at the Center for the CAPRISA, it's called CAPRISA, Center for AIDS Research in Program of AIDS Research in South Africa. Yeah, I finally got that correct. CAPRISA. So that's when I when I did where I did my postdoc, and now there we are focusing on HIV immunology and looking at the transmission across the female genital tract. So that time now I switched completely from TB. Now I was mainly focusing now on the virus from bacteria to viruses. Yeah, mainly focusing on HIV immunology. So there when I did my postdoc for about 2 years on HIV immunology.
So, what, based on your experience, like moving from tuberculosis to HIV, different pathogen, different mode of action, and so much difference in that. So, what you can share with our viewers that how they should develop their skill set or the toolkit, which then they can use in their postdoc for a different research topic or totally sometimes because we have seen plant pathologist people going into immunology based on their new research experiences or expectations.
Yeah, no, so for me is like I said, the reason for switching from TB to HIV was more about broadening my mind and skill set. And to do that, because the techniques that I had used when I was doing my TB research for my PhD, so were also the same skill sets that I could still use, even though I switched the pathogen from bacteria to HIV, but I could still use the same skill set in terms of the laboratory assays like flow cytometry, multiplex cytokine analysis. So I still use the same techniques. So the techniques are still the same. Just now that the pathogen has switched and underlying mechanisms were different, but the laboratory techniques were still similar that I could still use the same that I used for my PhD. But that also then allowed me to be able now to understand now how different pathogens work, how our bodies are able to adapt to different pathogens, how our systems are able to adapt and use different pathways to fight different pathogens. So for me, that was quite interesting to be able to understand from both the immune responses from both the bacteria and the viruses side. So and again for me, like I said, it's some people may see it differently. Or some people will want to, they say, you choose your niche, choose a focus, and then focus on that one and become a well expert on a particular topic or particular field. But I usually just look at things differently. Yeah, I like to broaden even though I still have focus on infectious disease, but look at various aspects of infectious disease rather than just looking at one narrow focus of infectious disease. So that is just for me how I've been operating even up till now, looking at different aspects of infectious disease rather than one particular focus. But at least the general theme for me is still like infectious disease and prevention. But then looking at it from wide different angles, just for me, it's just about broadening my mind and understanding things from different perspectives. Just yeah.
Absolutely, and also this helps uh, mm, coming up with the interdisciplinary research programs where you are collaborating with different people or with their expertise. And you already, as you mentioned, that you wanted to do this to increase your skill set so that you are working with different pathogens, and now you can establish. So the future after the postdoc, normally it's like you start working towards the faculty positions and you joined as a medical research scientist and now became the chief research scientist. So how this journey coming back to University of Cape Town from academia, so you started with academia, went to industry, got your exposure, and then came back to academia, because this is one of the hot topics. Mostly people says that either you like academia or you like industry. It is tough to like both and work, although there are exceptions which happens these days, which obviously is what research does to everyone. But what how like if whatever you experienced in industry and in academia, based on your experience, what you can share with our viewers.
Yeah, I think in research, both industry and academia are important for us to be able to get to the end goal. For example, for me, my end goal is more about developing vaccines for tuberculosis, for example, or contributing towards developing vaccine. And academic institutions don't make the vaccines. Vaccines are made by industry, right? So mostly by industry. So, and for me, I wanted to have that industry experience to really see, how things are done in industry, how the knowledge that we generate in the academic environment, how that knowledge gets translated into the industry to make the actual product, the actual physical product that comes back to academia for us to test either in clinical trial or in the lab or whatever it may be. So that was my reason for being able to say I needed to have that industry experience so that I see how those end products and understand how those end products are made. So that at least my passion was still in academia because I still had passion for teaching and research, and which is in industry things are like SOPs, things are like very strict that you really cannot deviate from protocols because that is what it should be, so that the manufacturing and everything is according to standard, so you cannot deviate. But for me, as I wanted to have that experience, but my passion has been to be in academia where I'm a bit more flexible. So I want to sleep in the night and dream about something, think about something, and then I'm able to get to the lab the next day and test it out to see if what I was thinking about can really work. Which for me the industry environment constrains you that you cannot really do that. But and that is the reason for me coming back to academia so that I could combine that very strict industry processes in my academic research career. And that really helped because now when I started with my research career back in academia in the university, I could still implement those strict protocols, those strict quality control protocols in my research. So that to make sure that now that for myself and my students, the data that we generate is reliable. So those strict protocols are still necessary in the academic environment. But for me, the additional advantage will be that I sleep in the night or I think of an idea and I'm able to just get into the lab, look what type of antibodies or reagents that I have, and I'm able to test that idea almost immediately and then convince myself whether it's worth pursuing it or not. So yeah, that has been my goal, passion. Being coming back to academia was being able to teach guide future scientists, train them, but as well as have that flexible environment where I can test ideas and yeah.
And absolutely, based on your experience of industry, now you can train your students while mentoring them so that they are already ready for industry jobs. If they want to go to that path, that's what the mentors do. They support wherever they want to go, either academy or industry, and having that experience makes you a better mentor so that you can prepare them well for their future, journeys.
Yeah,
Talking of
exactly.
mentoring, which is also, as you mentioned, one of the driving force why you moved from industry to academia, because obviously in academia you have more interaction with next generation of entomologists or public health workers or wherever they want to go. That is what you can do more. What is the most fulfilling achievement you have experienced, or what keeps you going when it comes to mentoring?
Yeah, I think the fulfilling experience for me is, when you find a student who just completed their undergraduate degree and wants to start their master's, and then they come to you, come to the lab, and they have very little experience about laboratory work, about knowledge about immunology, knowledge about certain assets that we use on daily basis. They have completely no idea how it works or what it is, but their passion, they have their passion, and they have a passion to do this. And then for me, what is fulfilling is to be able to take them from that first day where they completely have very little to no knowledge about this thing, and 2 years later they graduate with their masters, or 4 years later or 6 years later they move from their masters to PhD, and they graduate now being experts in these things that they had no idea about on the first day. So that fulfills me that I'm able now to pass that knowledge, impart that knowledge for them to be able now to pass it on to their future students as well. So for me, that is what keeps me going. They're able to meet somebody the first day and they have no knowledge of something, and then a few years later, they are already experts in that thing when they graduate with their degree. So that is what keeps me going.
Absolutely. And I think that's a wonderful suggestion for all the viewers who want to join Dr. Shay's lab, that you only need the passion, the commitment to work towards, and then Dr. Muki Shey is there to transform you from a naive student to an expert of your field. That is what is the important role of mentors in academia or in research in general are. So
Yeah, and
now,
also
yeah.
just to maybe add to it also, so like I said, my even whether I'm working with students or even with staff, but who are passionate and who are willing to learn. So sometimes you find people will advertise certain positions that say, no, we need 2 years of experience, we need 5 years of experience, and people who just recently graduated from school, they need an opportunity in order to gain that experience. So if everybody wants 2 years, 3 years of experience, then new students who just finish school will never have that experience.
So
So for
true.
me, I look at the passion. So if you come to me on the first day, even uh, I'm looking for a lab technologist, and then you have the passion and you are willing to learn. So I'm always willing to offer you that first opportunity for you to
Mhm.
learn and get that experience so that you can, even after 2 years, you decide to move on, but at least you already have that 2 years that the other people are looking for. So for me, the passion is to be able to see that you have the passion to really do what you want to do and you are willing to learn. And then I'm always willing to offer the opportunity so that you gain the experience. Yeah, so that you,
Absolutely.
yeah.
That is a very valid point, that whenever they ask for experienced, and then nobody is there to give them that break. So it's wonderful to have mentors like you who actually see the passion and the commitment what the student brings, instead of looking at what skill sets they have, because that is one thing which we always say, that you can always learn skill set if you really are open minded and ready to learn, instead of just following books or protocols without troubleshooting. I don't think that there are successful researchers you can create. Speaking of troubleshooting now, Dr. Shea, you have been in like research for more than decades. Now, what was the most challenging part which you have faced in your life as a researcher, and based on your experience, what you can share with the audiences that they can prepare themselves better?
Yeah, so it's been nothing really comes easy, right? So they are very, like you said at the beginning, where you plan that something is going to take 6 months and then it takes 18 months. So I think when you start this journey, whether a student, master's, PhD, doctoral student, I think the first thing that you need to just have in mind is to have patience, right? Be able to make sure that you have patience because you're going to need a lot of the patience along the way. Because things don't always work according to plan. You plan everything on paper, but once you start to implement them, it's a totally different scenario. But the first thing will be that you need to have patience when you're starting the journey. And the second thing will be that also you need to choose your environment wisely. Right? So your environment that you are also may determine whether you succeed uh, in a short space of time or you take longer to succeed based on the environment you are, based on the support system that you have. And the other thing will just be to, if you can, to choose your mentors wisely. Right? You choose your mentors wisely because you can, if you don't, you can be passionate, but if you don't have a good mentor, you will struggle to get to where you are going. And you can be passionate and you have a good mentor, but if the environment where you are based is not supportive enough, so you will still be able to struggle to meet to your expectation. So I will say it's a combination of things, combination of things to be have patience, choose your environment wisely in terms of whether the availability of the infrastructure and the expertise that is will be necessary for you to complete your projects, and also to have, if you are able to choose your mentors wisely.
Wonderful points. And I think all the people who are listening to this conversation will keep this in mind. And one more important point which you mentioned about like how not like choosing your mentors wisely means what we have seen, and we had enough of conversations with our researcher celebrities, that how not one mentor is perfect for all the mentees and vice versa. You, like as a mentor and as a mentee, you have to find that sweet spot where you can work with a person without getting too much stressed, and without being so ignorant that you are not learning during that PhD, because that is also important part, that PhD is a training, and then if you are not making the most of it, it will give you a tough time in the future. And we have all the stories from our celebrities discussing all those different parts. So now another point which we talk about, like when these failed experiments, as you mentioned also briefly, that you plan for something for 6 months and it takes 18 months. So all these failed experiments, all these stress which it brings, what the was your way to cope up with that, and based on your experience, what you can share that how they can prepare themselves better.
Yeah, so the most important thing for me going through those challenges was that I had a very supportive mentor, very supportive supervisor, and a very supportive environment where people were willing to help, to troubleshoot experiment, and also where you go to the lab, you do an experiment and it doesn't work, and you choosing a good mentor will be a mentor where you are able to knock at their door, come in and tell them that experiment didn't work, and then they don't sort of shout at you like you don't know what you are doing, and they're able to understand, sit, troubleshoot together with you, understand what you did and the results that you got, to be able to and then what the next steps will be. So what will keep you going through many weeks or time of failed experiment for me will be uh, the supportive environment, and be able to have your supervisors or other colleagues who are able to help you troubleshoot, are able to help you cope with the stress of failure. Because at that time you're seeing it as failure, but eventually when things work out, it will be it, you don't look at it as failure anymore. So it becomes like an experience, right? But at that time it looks like failure. But once you get past it, it becomes experience. And you are then able to also now to guide other people. Because, for example, the 18 months of experiments that I was doing was optimizing, for example, a flow cytometry panel, right? I needed to do like I think a 14 color flow cytometry panel, like where you can measure up to 14 different markers on a single cell at the same time. So no, it took long because I couldn't get the right combination together, different things, moving parts. But now when I finally got it right, so actually I actually became more of an expert now in developing that panel in net access. That a lot of people now were coming to me to get advice on what to do, how to develop this panel, what markers to look for if you are trying to look for dendritic cells and monocytes and innate cells. So I became more of an expert now. But that was not after the 18 months when everything now was working fine. So I look back now, it became a good experience. But during that time, it was looking like failure. So, like I said, more about the supporting environment, but being patient to go through it, but just making sure that at least you are doing the right things, doing the things that you are supposed to be doing, and following the protocols correctly. And if you don't get the results, then you see how you can amend the protocol and try again. But at the end of the day, now you become an expert. When everything works out, you become an expert in that field. And that is still most of the things that I'm still using up till now, almost like I don't know, 20 years later or 18 years later after those failed experiments, I'm still using those experiments and the lessons I learned from that up to today. So I would say no experience, whether failure, you just turn them into experiences and they become
Absolutely.
successes in the future.
And I think in research, as you correctly said, that there is nothing called failure if you're learning, making those as learning lessons. And again, obviously, if you're following the protocols well, you might need to tweak them a little bit based on your research question. But having these three things in the lab environment, wherever you choose to be, are very crucial. Like, first one is the approachability of your supervisor, having those transparent conversation with them, because these days we are seeing that somewhere all around the world PhD students are so stressed that sometimes they start making up data which obviously no PI wants them to manipulate it or to change anything. So having those transparent conversation where you are not stressed about the failed experiment, but you are excited to discuss that with the supervisor or even peer connects, because peers also helps you a lot, because someone might have experienced the same challenges as you and can help you troubleshoot, save those couple of months or days or weeks depending on how big of troubleshooting we are doing. And having that supportive environment is always important when you are going through a tough patch of research life. You having those family members, either your lab members, family, friends, whosoever is your support system, having those support system in place is very much suggested and required, because at the end of the day every researcher is human being and we have our own emotion cycles, what not all. And main keeping this sure that your mental health well-being is taken care of, I think most of the work is already done, and all these challenges can be easily accomplished so that you can make to the next step. So at the edge of the conversation, Dr. Shea, I would like to ask the basics of your success, the key parameters which you will say that these were the things which were responsible for my success and you would like to share with our audience?
Yeah, yeah, the key things to my success were like family, right?
Mhm.
Family was important in my success. Like I said, I am what I am today because I had somebody to guide me, which was my senior brother, who is 11 years older than me. Because he guided me into switching from registering from physics into science and doing biochemistry and eventually now being in the clinical research space that I am was based on a family that also supports you. And also when I actually did my undergraduate degree, the honors degree, and and I was looking to actually start a master's. I actually start a master's. I I didn't have funding to continue with the master's. But one important thing happened is that while I was completing my honors degree, we had a research component, and I was presenting my final results from my data. So I was just, I put in all my all into generating the data, and the day of the presentation, I put in my best to do the presentation and transmit the data across. And then there was just somebody in the audience that I've never met before, so who just enjoyed the way I presented the data and answered the question. And then the 2 days later, a few days later, he came to me and was like, "Oh, you are this person who presented." I was like, "Yes." Like, "Okay, what are your plans for the future?" I'm like, "Well, I would like to do a master's PhD, but at the moment, I don't have funding to proceed." And then he asked me to come to his office and we have a chat. So I went to his office and then we had a chat. And then and after the chat, we just said, "Okay, that was our interview for your master's project, for a master's program. So when do you want to start?" I was like, "Okay, when is the first day I should start?" And then that was how I got the scholarship. So Professor William Honeycomb, who was my master's PhD supervisor, that's how he gave me the opportunity and the scholarship that sponsored my master's and PhD program. And that was just based from me doing a presentation and putting in all my best. So what I wanted to say is that whatever you do, you never know who is watching. So put in your best foot forward and just do the best that you can because you don't know who is watching. So that is my advice would be that, put in your best and lay the good foundation, and then things will always work out for the better.
Absolutely. And I think that was a really great last point time addition about having these networking events. Like
Mm,
whenever these students or the postdocs are going out for scientific meetings, conferences, as you mentioned, it happened, I think, to most of us that you accidentally bump into your postdoc supervisor, mostly like that. In your case, it was your master's and PhD supervisor. But yes, this happens whenever you're presenting your data, having that comfort, how comfortable you are presenting your data, how technically sound you are while answering those questions, probably are your places where somebody will offer you your next position. And this in academia happens more a lot than in industry, but also it happens in industry. So wherever you want to go, having this open mindedness that whatever you are presenting, how comfortable you are with that, and then how your interaction with them. You should not be very limited or, within yourself. Whenever you are in these meetings, probably try to talk. And we see that we have so many different personalities. Some people are very outgoing, very well in networking, whereas some do not. But whatever takes or drives your boat is good. We are thankful for Dr. Muki for taking time out for this conversation. And to all our audience, we can say if you want to write to Dr. Muki, you can write to him. If you want STEM for Science to put you in touch with our researcher celebrities for mentoring or for future guidelines, we are there to support you. The only thing which we ask from you is your passion for research. And if this is what makes you happy, we are there to support you in all the very way we can. With this, we'll say thank you so much, Dr. Muki, once again, and wish you good luck for your future.
Thank you very much for the opportunity and thanks for having me.
Okay. For all the audience, we'll say stay tuned for another episode of Researcher Celebrity.